welcome back to another episode of the Higher Ed Podcast. I'm your host, Kamar DJ Arnett. I'm flying solo today. Have a great guest with us, Mr. Jeremy Bean. How are you, my friend? Glad to have you. Could you please introduce yourself to our audience and maybe give them a bit of your origin story? How'd you get here?
Well, good morning. Awesome to be talking with you. Thank you for having me on the podcast and talking, Kamar. My origin story. So, I'm the assistant vice president for enterprise change and transformation at Penn State. How I got here is kind of long, winding road, I guess you could say. I've been here 13 years now.
Ah, nice.
So quite a while. I'm a graduate of Penn State, so I found my way back here after multiple years away.
Yes.
Um, I got into education in general right after graduating. And I was really interested in sort of the experiential education model. So I worked in middle school, then I worked in a private school dealing with all K through 12. Eventually, I found my way out to New England, did some work with community camps, summer camps in that space, and then got turned on to, hey, we do this at the corporate level, corporate retreats, leadership development training,
Sure.
management development, change management. So started doing that, slowly got into that to the point where, I quit my full-time job and was doing that full-time, got to travel all over the country in different places. Um, and life brought us back to State College, looking to start a family.
Sure.
And State College, if you've never been here, is a smallish town in the dead center of Pennsylvania. Not real easy to get to or out of all of the time. So when we got into the idea of starting a family, decided I needed to be home. It was difficult to
Sure.
travel all the time for work. So, look to the university for, what are opportunities. Um, my first job here was actually in sustainability, so water, waste, energy. I was
Wow.
hired to, help Penn State figure out how to lower their footprint and things that we should do in that regard. And we had some, big successes, things that we were doing, and folks started to notice like, hey, you're pretty good at managing these big institutional changes. This world of change management, organizational change was developed or was developing out in business and industry. Should we be doing something in higher ed? So worked with a colleague, we put together some ideas, proposal, went back to my day job after we did all of that work, and about a year later got asked, "Hey, do you want to do this full time? We're gonna stand up an office and start to do this."
Nice.
So we did. That was back in 2017, I think. And pretty quickly from there, new administration took over, did some work for the new president, had some conversations with her and her senior vice president, chief of staff, about a more centralized office doing strategic work for the institution around enterprise change and transformation. And here we are. We started I think there were 7 of us that moved from other offices to begin with. And when I'm done hiring here in a couple months, I think we'll be at almost 20. So, not a bad thing.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, I'm also Penn State alum. Small world. We are.
We are.
I had a mentor that told me 1 out of every 1,000. So apparently that is true.
Yes, sir. There's no place in this world that I've traveled to where I don't run across a Penn State or somehow, some way, in an airport, in a town. Like it is pretty amazing.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's helped me significantly in my career.
Yeah.
I remember I met a young guy, I was interviewing him, and he ended up being a Penn State grad, and we're actually super close now. And I was like, "Well, I gotta hire you." I said, I gotta give you a shot," and I did, and it turned out well for both of us. So,
Excellent.
small world. So when did you, if you could say, when did you first kind of fall in love with higher ed and higher ed leadership?
I think it was probably a couple years into the sustainability work and
Sure.
the just seeing the impacts from, not only the work we were doing to change things on campus and have an impact, but then the educational part of it, the student experience. One of the first big wins that I had in my role was a student-run farm at Penn State that for years had been in conversation with faculty and students. We started as an agricultural college, back in the 1800s. So it's really our roots. And it was always fascinating that we hadn't stood up something like this where students were learning, living, growing together, those type of things. So brought together faculty members and students, and eventually we were able to secure some funding both internally and externally. And we started it as a small pilot, like half an acre.
Sure.
Now I've not been in it for quite a while. Like I kind of got it started and then we hired folks and now it's grown. I think it's a 10-acre facility and they just do some amazing work there with students and the local community. Uh, and just to watch that unfold and happen, I was like, this is a place where you can make real impact on folks in lots of different ways. So kind of fell in love with that from a higher education perspective, and then said, okay, well, how do I take what I do well and apply that? Because I'm not faculty, I don't teach students. I purposely did not go on and further, get further degrees. Like my idea was experience. Like I want to learn by doing, and then I want to apply that and make a difference. And so that's kind of how I got into all of this and said, this is the career that I'm going to make for myself. And man, if you would have asked me 13 years ago if I was going to be in higher education,
Sure.
I would have said no, no way. But here I am. So
Wow. Okay. So let's kind of talk about, I know you're passionate about a lot of topics in higher ed, but one of the ones that comes top of mind is the cultural shift happening in higher education today. And we've been covering that a lot on past episodes, so I'd love to kind of hear your take and perspective on it. What's happening?
yeah, so I think like any organization, evolution happens. Society changes, internal pressures, external pressures. And, I think for a very long time, we in higher education were pretty stable, right? We understood how to grow. We understood kind of what the mission was. And, we kind of went through a heyday for higher education where there were lots of young, adults that needed education. A degree was a pathway to a different life for folks. And we did a really good job of finding funding, bringing in money. Tuition started to climb to pay for all the things that we were doing. And, I think we hit a point in the last 10 or 15 years when people started to say, well, hold on a second. You know, this is getting expensive. What's the return for a student that's, paying to go to school? Can we continue to just drive education costs up? Which has started to drive the culture then to think differently, right? So I know the world that you live in and much of the world that I live in is, oh, we need to function more efficiently as an
Sure.
organization, right? We need to spend our student dollars that are coming in, or taxpayer dollars in our case, as a, partially state-related institution, wisely. We can't
Sure.
just keep adding costs because we think it's the right thing to do and we're doing all of this work and effort. And so the culture has been slow to shift, right? Because the greater good, we talk about the greater good of education, and it absolutely is, but it also needs to function inside of the society that we exist in. So we're seeing more and more people like myself, like yourself and what you do, and sort of business process reengineering and understanding how we do things. In the past, right? Most institutions, Penn State size, have been very decentralized. They've allowed, each individual college or campus to do their own thing. And it worked. No one did anything wrong. It was the strategy. It made a ton of sense. Where we are today, it probably doesn't make a ton of sense because we have duplication of efforts, duplication of systems. So we're spending a lot of money that we could essentially put towards our students and academics in a different way, or research in our case. So the culture has been slow to shift behind that, but I think you're starting to see many people understand the bigger picture and saying, okay, is there a better way to do this? And how do we do that? And then sort of re rethinking about what's our mission, right? Educating our students or doing research. And is what we're doing apply to that? You being a Penn Stater, you know that, man, there was a ton of stuff that Penn State owned and operated that were ancillarily related to education, but I wouldn't say necessarily directly related to the mission, right? Things like we operated our own hotels, we operate our own airport, all kinds of things that Penn State has done in the past that we're starting to go to. Is this mission centric and driven, or is this best left somewhere else and some other entity within the state of Pennsylvania can manage those things and we can focus on the students. I think the place that is still is hard to wrestle with is as a culture, how responsive should we be to changes in the market and society around us? We want to be agile and nimble, but at the same time, there's something to be said to not jumping after every new technology or innovation and kind of saying we still need these core educational components and these core critical skills in all of our students. So that's a balancing act that we face.
Absolutely. Do you feel like it's something that's being embraced or maybe was even ushered in by COVID, or do you think it's kind of a natural transition?
Um, I think in some cases, COVID accelerated it because we had to adapt, right? I think there were some things probably that were underway prior to COVID that were ushering us in this direction. I also think COVID created this big innovation, and then many of us, I feel, started to backslide a little bit after COVID too, to getting back to sort of traditional ways of thinking and doing. And well, we had to change things because of COVID, but um, not sure we're going to stay on that cutting edge. And that's not everything. There are many things that I think COVID um, created that have sort of pushed us further in that direction. But I also think there have been some things that have backslid over time into more the traditional higher education model because it's comfortable, right? People, when you're dealing with change, we're hardwired to be steady, comfortable,
Sure.
take care of our basic needs. Change, it goes against all of those things. So it's not something we do easily or very well. And that really is everyone, myself included.
Absolutely. So then, as you think about that, right, then you have to lead change, right? And from a leadership standpoint, management standpoint, and what do they say? Nothing's guaranteed except change and uncertainty. So, what's your philosophy and approach? How do you do that?
So it actually, for me, it comes back to sort of basic human psychology and what we understand about human beings and how we exist in this world, how we're wired, how some of us are wired differently than others, and trying to get down to sort of that basic part for folks, and then saying, okay, how do we build change from there up to get to where we want to go? It's not easy. In a big place like Penn State, you can't get to everyone. You can't have a one-on-one conversation with everyone about their experience with change, their preferences, but we can start to educate them on, it's okay to feel this way when change is happening around you. It's okay to say, hey, I'm tired. When are we going to stop all of the
Sure.
change stuff, right? Change fatigue, we talk about that in our field all the time. Is it a real thing? How do you mitigate it? The seat that I sit in, I try to tell people like, look, I don't see the pace of change slowing down. There isn't this spot in time we're going to hit and everything's going to just stabilize and stay comfortable for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Technology, people are evolving that fast. So how do we start to help build the skill sets within each individual person to manage through that for themselves?
Right.
Right? I think I saw this morning, and I didn't get a chance to read it, but I think Brene Brown just put something out about how, you know, humans aren't designed to deal with the amount of change as quickly as we're dealing with it in the workplace environment. So if that's not how we're built, then how do we manage through that for our folks? So we start there, and then we try to connect that sort of individual approach to university strategy, right? So where the direction that at Penn State, our board and our leadership, our president, our provost are taking us, and then try to drive them through a process that at least people can understand the why, how it's happening, how it affects them, and then how we're getting to the place we're going. Now, people don't always agree with the change. It impacts them in ways that we can't understand. And man, we can plan, all day long, and we're still going to hit things in any sort of process change that we didn't anticipate, right? And we're going to have to do some real-time adjustments. So trying to help people get to that space of understanding. If I tell you this is our timeline and milestones, and this is when we expect to go live, and then I tell you, 6 months into it, okay, we're adjusting it either up or down. It
Right.
isn't because I lied to you in the beginning. It isn't because anyone was being disingenuous. It's just as we went through the process, things happened and we had to
Absolutely.
adjust, right? As a learning organization, isn't that what we should be doing anyway? Constantly learning things around us and adjusting. And change really doesn't happen in a linear fashion either, right? It's very iterative. I say, like, if you draw on a graph how people think change happens, it's kind of a bottom left to top right steady climb, and in reality, if you were to graph it out, it kind of does a bunch of loops and circles and it
Sure.
accelerates and then it slows down. And, again, that's just trying to get people realistic to what's happening. And the other side of it is, and again, I think this is your work with the podcast and other things you're doing, just
Sure.
generally trying to educate folks to everything that's going around them because it's really easy to get into your college of engineering that you support as a faculty member or staff member and really only focus on the problems within that area. Uh, and when I start to have conversations about, well, here's what's happening at the state level, here's what's happening at the federal level, here's why we're doing the things that we're doing, it's kind of like eyes open and go, oh, I didn't necessarily know that that was going on. And I didn't
Right.
recognize that this was impacting me here in the space where I understand and control and am very comfortable, right? So that sort of trying to raise everyone's awareness to what's going on around them and how that impacts us is really important.
Sure. Yeah, I'm reading this book now called the Scrum Field Book. And our company is incorporating a lot of that, philosophy. And one of the things he talks about is how, people kind of create this, action plan with certain rules and metrics. And he said what a lot of organizations will do is they'll try to make those reports and chalkboards correct. And even though the data, and analysis may say something different, so to your point, instead of pivoting and making adjustments, they continue on a path that's leading them in the wrong direction and leading them to nowhere, just to make sure that the original plan and strategy and things that were on the chalkboard were correct.
Yeah.
And I don't think higher ed can afford to do that. The world is just too dynamic.
Yeah, that's a great word for it. I mean, just trying to be dynamic in a dynamic world is what we're trying to be, but it's really difficult when you have a, huge organization with thousands of subcultures and different needs. And that's, we always every day take a smaller step in that direction and hope it's the right one. And you mentioned, sort of KPIs and metrics and data. That's another area from cultural perspective that's
Sure.
really changing in higher education. Again, not that anyone did anything wrong in the years
Right.
past or made bad decisions. It wasn't necessary to have a lot of this, clean data to make decisions on. There were lots of different systems that we used here at Penn State. And so now when you start to get into conversations like, yeah, okay, we should be measuring the things that matter. We want to be showing, a positive change that we're instilling. But then you start to look at the data and where it comes from, and is it clean enough to use and make decisions? Are your metrics the right ones? Are your KPIs the right ones? And constantly adjusting those. And now that artificial intelligence is starting to come into higher ed, an even bigger need to get your data and your supporting information correct, because if you want to use the power that's in those tools, that all has to be somewhat standard and clean. Otherwise, it's going to make inferences and give you
Yep.
results that might not be accurate. So,
Absolutely.
there's also understanding now that we have to accelerate that data governance and data management part of this in our culture that just, again, we haven't had to in the past. It wasn't
Right.
necessary to always have that to make your case. Folks were much better at sort of the anecdotal, I call it anecdata,
Right.
that they kind of pull in and make a case for why we're doing something or should be doing something.
Absolutely. So, then a great segue into AI, right? That I mean, that's the hot topic. Where do you think higher ed is in regard to AI, right? Is it in the first inning? Is it in the third inning? Is it still in the locker room? You know, how do you think higher ed's adapting?
Um, so I think we're in the first inning, if I'm gonna
Sure.
take it, which is a great baseball analogy. I've got a 12-year-old that lives and breathes baseball. So that's my life outside of here is often shuttling him around to baseball games and practices. But
Nice.
I think we're in the first inning. I think there's lots of uh, splashy announcements that are out there in higher education about, what we're going to do with AI, which to me is more sort of marketing and PR right now. Uh, there's a lot of us that are figuring out, okay, what's behind that? What is higher ed's role in the artificial intelligence disruption, right? Our new provost talks about how this is a huge disruptor to higher education in ways that we don't even comprehend right now. It may be the technology of our generation that disrupts everything more so than anything else that's come before it.
Sure.
So I think we're all wrestling with what's the right place for our institutions to be in this AI space, right? The big, we're never going to compete with the big corporations, the Metas and the Googles that are putting billions into figuring out, how to use this, how to monetize it, how to get it out into the world and the things that it are doing. But what do we do that's unique in higher education? And then how do we play in that space? And we're kind of here at Penn State, we're thinking about it like we really exist around the intersections of higher education, how it intersects with everyone's daily life, how it intersects with their job, how it intersects with education, right? And we can do something that these big corporations can't, which is really research and learn and use the tools in different ways to talk about other outcomes, right? They're huge energy users, they're huge water users. Is there a way that a place like Penn State can do research by using AI here in our space and then figuring out, well, what if we did this with our own nuclear power plant? Could we
Mm,
drive some energy efficiency? Could we use less water in that space? How do people use it in equitable manners, ethical manners? How do we use it in educating the next generation? And I don't think we're there yet. I think we're in the beginning of those conversations and starting to pull what are the collective resources in higher ed that can really work with artificial intelligence and how we do that. I mean, obviously, everyone wants to talk about efficiency and how you use it from an operational perspective. Was it the guy from NVIDIA that said basically, AI won't replace you and your job. What will be the person that knows how to use AI in your job, right?
right,
And
right.
so, right, if that's kind of the mindset of, okay, well, we currently train the next workforce in our students. So how do we do that with them in ways that they know how to use the tool? How do we do it with our own staff and faculty? Like, how do faculty understand how to use the tool in ways that ethically and morally are responsible? Our students are being, trained with it, potentially being taught with it in ways that we haven't been able to do before. But then they're thinking about it critically, right? The outputs that they get is this the right thing that it's telling me, and how do I go figure that out? Like we don't want to lose that critical thinking ability that human beings have in using these particular tools. So I think we're all, you could go out and look at, all the Big 10 institutions or even the California state system and look at all the big splashy announcements that they've made and the things that they want to do. But behind all of that, we're still all trying to figure out, well, what exactly does that mean? What type of faculty do you need to hire? What type of research do you want to do? What type of suite of tools do you want to use within your own institution and train your folks on? I think folks are realizing, like, instead of making a big bet and saying we're going to go all in on this one tool, it's probably better to have a suite of tools that folks can start to use and understand, figure out what works better than others, what are the limitations, and then how can we iterate and innovate that, again, maybe the big tech corporations aren't doing, but higher ed could.
Right. So piggybacking on this, are you one of those kind of, I guess thinkers or people that are is, because I'm a big fan of Jensen Juan, right? He's really hot and popular right now. Probably neck and neck with Elon in terms of influence. Especially from a tech standpoint. Do you do you worry about AI taking jobs, or do you look at it more as I was listening to? I think it was a podcast yesterday, and they were talking about. Matter of fact, might have been the All In podcast, and I think Sachs was talking about how well, a lot of times we as human beings can't see the opportunity. So, when they replaced the horse and buggies with the cars, there was so many different industries that came, and it's not just cars itself and factories, it's roads, it's hotels because you got roads. And it's like, when you really sit and unpack, you're like, well, however many people lost their jobs for being able to work on a horse and buggy,
Mhm.
infinite industries were created that provided infinite jobs for so many people. How do you kind of reconcile that?
Yeah, so personally, I don't worry about AI replacing people in their jobs. I think there's always going to be a critical need for human beings and the way that we think and the way that we process, and the way that we engage societally. But I think what it will create are different opportunities. The horse and buggy is a great example, right?
Sure.
I don't know if you know this or not, but not far from where our main campus is located, about an hour away, Lewisburg, PA, I think it was, or Mifflinburg, was the capital of basically making horse and buggy
Sure.
wheels and tires, and like it was the Detroit of the time, right?
Right.
And when Henry Ford was doing his work, he came there originally thinking, okay, the infrastructure is here
Sure.
to convert. And at the time, the folks there couldn't see it, right? They said, no,
Wow.
there's always going to be a need for this. We're not interested. This newfangled thing is not a thing that's going to affect us that much. We're not interested. And that's what
So
took.
you're saying Mifflin, PA could have been Detroit?
Yes.
Wow.
And so, and there's plenty of examples across history, right? Where as people, we just can't understand the impacts
Yep.
to the future and what is going to be created. And I think this is why, others, the provost and others are talking about artificial intelligence being that disruptor that we can't see all the things that may come out of this in the future right now, as it evolves, as we start to use it, but there will always be a need for human beings. We just don't know exactly what they're all going to be doing because they might be
Exactly.
replaced in certain functions now. But if you're replaced in something that way, what's the next thing
Yep.
that's going to be developed that you're going to be needed for? So, again, I think from a workforce development standpoint, higher ed's in a unique place to constantly be monitoring that and adapting and saying, oh, we're starting to see this industry emerge, right?
Sure.
Kind of the way that the semiconductor industry emerged quickly as high power computing and things started to happen. Where can we make investments and steer our own education and development that we're prepared for that, that there are people that can do that work? So for artificial intelligence, for me, is the same thing. As we start to understand it more and it starts to potentially replace people, where do they go next? Because there's still going to be a need for them. It's just a tool that is allowing us to go further, just like the automobile was, right?
Absolutely. So if higher ed gets all this change right, We used to say, well, what does higher ed look like in 5 to 10 years, right? But the singularity is so much closer now. Like
Mm.
5 to 10 years is just too far out.
Yes.
What does it look like to you in the next 2 to 3 years?
So I think in the next 2 to three years, you'll see a lot of higher education institute, and you already are starting to partner with business and industry from a workforce development upskilling perspective. It's not necessarily degree based, right? We don't have the time for our employees to go through a 2 year or a 4 year degree program to upskill. So, what are the certificate, non-credit bearing types of programs we can create to upskill employees as we start to figure out how AI fits in and then what those roles become.
Sure.
I think a lot of us will be uh, in that realm, while at the same time sticking to sort of our core, which is 17, 18-year olds figuring out what they want to do with their life and coming to work or coming to school and getting a degree. I think the other thing that's going to change in the next 2 to 3 years, and I feel like it's already headed that direction, is trying to better align the student experience with the job that they may eventually have once they get out of
Mm,
college, let's say. So when you and I went to school, right, this is the way I think about it. There was value in the degree that we got, right? We had a degree and it said, okay, you went through this process. You are now marketable to whatever job fields that you're going to go into. And you go out and you start to apply, and people are like, okay, great. You got your Bachelor of Science in XYZ. We understand it means this. We're interested in hiring you. Because higher ed has done such a good job of growing and educating society, that degree itself, to me, it holds less value today, which is then when
okay.
we get into the tuition conversation. The schools that will differentiate themselves and probably remain are the ones that say, well, okay, we're still going to grant degrees, but the way in which you get your degree is going to be a differentiator for work for the industry that might hire you, whether it's government, business, community. They're going to say, okay, at Penn State, very early on, you had some exposure to what the job market was going to look like, and you made some decisions through the course of your education to shape your experiences. So when you get that degree, we're like, great, I want to hire Jeremy from Penn State because I know this was his experience while he was there. These are the tools and skills that I'm fairly confident he is coming out with, and
Sure.
bang, he's going to hit the ground running today, as opposed to institutions that may just stay in the degree. I came in, I got educated, I did, I learned, went to class, took my exams, I showed that I got that knowledge. Now I have the degree. Hey, Ford or GM or, hire me because I have this degree from Penn State. I think that's going to hold less value than the experience they have throughout education. And I think quickly we are trying as institutions to figure that out. And as you know, with the demographic cliff, every business would understand that, well, you've got less customer base, therefore they're going to be less of those. So that value is going to change as well over time. So how do you adapt to that? And it can't be, this is the thing that I think we've all been in for the last 30 years. The answer to fixing our problems is to grow, right? More degree programs, more students, more faculty. You fix your budget problems by generating more revenue, therefore you have to grow. I think
Sure.
we're all quickly realizing, well, growth might be in different areas because of the demographics and what's being asked of us. So just growing isn't the answer. It's something else.
Absolutely. So I'll bring it to a close here, but you touched on another topic that we've talked about a lot on recent episodes, this demographic cliff. Can you maybe unpack that just a little bit? Because I know some people are saying it's real, a lot of people are saying it's not, and then a lot of people are saying it's obvious. It's just the next, stage of things. How do you see that?
I mean, I think if you're talking about your core business driver as higher ed, are your graduating high school seniors, right? That's where most of your revenue is generated.
Sure.
It's the highest number of students that you enroll, and it's like for a land grant like Penn State, it's the primary audience that we're supposed to serve in the state of Pennsylvania. So it's real in the fact that that number, the number of those students is declining and will continue to decline for the next 10 to 15 years before it levels out and then slowly starts to rebound a little bit. So it's real. And in fact, Pennsylvania itself is kind of ahead of the curve. We've
Sure.
already, our demographics have gone down. So there's just less students there. Where I think people say it's not real or it's not that big of an issue is if then you start to branch out and you say, okay, we're going to generate revenue in different ways in certificate programs, token programs. We're going to concentrate on the adult learner that wants some sort of education and we're going to drive revenue that way. Where I fall on that whole thing is yes, but your adult learner doesn't generate the same amount of revenue as your 17 to 18-year-old coming to college and paying to go to Penn State. So you have to basically exponentially increase the amount of those people that you're attracting to make up for the shortfall in the number of students you won't be attracting. And, there are tons of higher education institutions out there, right? The market for better term is saturated. So
Right.
there's lots of options. Um, so I do think that demographic cliff is going to impact us and change what we're doing in a multitude of ways. But we still have that foundational piece that we're going to need to continue to do. So, I'm always of the mindset like, okay, what does stability look like for the institution? If we know that there's a decline of those, how do we maintain stability in the decline and get out of the mindset of, well, we just have to recruit more out of state students and we have to be more competitive with these schools or we need more international students. Again, that's to me is just we have to grow to fix the problem. And I think the problem is more we need to do the right things that are mission driven by the institution and maybe cut away some of the things that we are doing in order to do those that made sense 10, 15, 20 years ago, but don't today. Um, and I think that's being some of what we're hearing from the federal government, right? So some of the rhetoric that's out there on higher education, I
Sure.
think that's part of why we're being hammered with that is because of the cost to get that degree. Is it valuable? Is it the same value that it once had out in the marketplace? And the answer kind of points to maybe not really. So what do we switch? How do we do some things differently to meet that demand?
Absolutely. And how challenging do you think it is for higher ed institutions to serve various demographics, right? Like so now you're having those same demographics potentially on the same campus, maybe some of them are online, but do you think it is a challenge or how challenging is it?
Um, I think it's a challenge, but I think it's one that we're well suited for
Sure.
with the different demographics. I mean, there's so many talented people. So many people that are much more, incredibly smart than I am that look at these different things and how to deal with those. The difficulty I think that we face in higher education is it's around strategy and resource investment because in any direction that we go, any bet, I'll say any bet that we make, there's resources that have to be invested. And again, what we haven't been good at in the past is saying, okay, we're going to stop investing over here to go in this direction.
Yep.
It's kind of like, well, we have to continue to maintain this while we shift over here. And so I think for leaders in higher education is trying to figure out how do you make those shifts in a timely manner because you don't want to be so far behind the curve that you've invested to go this direction, but every other university's beat you there, and so there
Right.
really isn't a market any longer. That's a challenge, but I think we can manage it because of the way higher ed is designed and all of really the different demographics that exist on our campus already. It's just a matter of making some strategic choices, and some of them are going to be, hey, we're going to take a bet that this is the right way to go with
Yep.
AI, and some of that bet may not pan out, right? I think if we try to wait until there's no risk involved in making those bets, that's when you're too far behind to really make a difference.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It reminds me of kind of the two conundrums of Google and Tesla, right? Google had search, so they didn't really want to do the AI thing, and they opened up the door, a window for ChatGPT and OpenAI to come in when a lot of people who know think Google should have been taken off with this and there never would have been an open AI. And then I think with Tesla, it's the same thing where, a lot of people were saying, hey, just make a $20,000 vehicle. And Elon, maybe in his stubbornness or just his commitment, he's like, nope, we're just making one without a steering wheel and that's it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you said, you come to those, well, do I take from here to do this and what do I go all in on?
Right. And then all the again all the like the electric car space is all the ancillary infrastructure that goes along with it that again if we had been thinking ahead as higher ed institutions we'd have been investing in well how do we scale the infrastructure to meet the electric car demand because that's the great equalizer in the world, right? I just saw an article the other day that someone has an idea that light posts on highways can be reconfigured to become charging stations in certain ways because all the infrastructure is run to
Right.
power those and they're all over the place on highways. So how do you tap into that infrastructure to create the next infrastructure? I was like, man, wouldn't it have been great if we could have gone back 20 years and said, let's invest here because that's going to be the thing that stops the technology that's already here to build the
Sure.
cars. Um, again, how do you do that in an institution like Penn State that can do those? Who has those strategy decisions? And then again, you're making a bet. Like we might have said, yeah, let's invest in that electric car infrastructure, and then it didn't work out. So now you're
Right.
sort of now how do you claw all of that back?
Right. Now all of a sudden the world pivots to hydro cars or something like that,
Yeah, right.
hydrogen cars or
Yeah,
something. It's like, oh no, right?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
absolutely. And last point, because you touched on this, and so I gotta delve a little bit into it. The challenge with higher ed and providing the value and ROI that really got somewhat exposed or brought to light
Mhm.
with COVID. You touched on it. How much of a challenge is that for higher ed?
It's a significant challenge, really. If you get behind the business of higher education, uh, tuition is generally your revenue driver, right? It's the
Sure.
biggest part of the bucket or the slice of the pie. And if you took everything else aside and said we weren't going to invest in anything, we were just going to somehow get static and stable, we would still have increasing cost every year because of healthcare, because of general salary increases to pay your people, right? A number of other things. So how do you generate more revenue to meet those costs? Even if you stabilized everything else and changed nothing, you still have to bring in more money. And if we're
Sure.
taking the growth, like, hey, there aren't enough students out there to do that, well, your only other lever is tuition, right?
Sure.
So now your tuition is becoming, again, that value proposition is becoming more and more difficult. So there are certainly uh, structural problems in higher education that I think we have to deal with from that perspective. And the other gets sort of bigger and more political, right? Because, if you look historically at like if we take the state of Pennsylvania, right? The percent of tuition that was paid by taxpayer dollars was super high, right? And what the student paid was super low. And now, I mean, there's an X graph that shows it goes the exact opposite, right?
Mm,
Taxpayer funding is much, much, much less. The amount of tuition that a student has to pay or their family is much higher. So we've sort of shifted that and that gets you back into the greater good conversation and
sure.
saying, well, if higher education is really a greater good for the country, which it has been for years, right? That's why other countries want to send
Absolutely.
their people here.
Right.
U.S. colleges and universities are seen as the best in the world for
Sure.
many different reasons. If we want that and we want that greater good, well, there has to be a shift maybe in the funding model and the way we think about it. Because again, I don't think we should just have an empty bucket at the end of the rainbow of money that we can spend however we want. It should be very efficient. It should be driven towards mission and what we're doing. But there still will be this reality of the cost of inflation and goods and other things not keeping up with tuition and the value that a degree gives. And, given our political climate today, that's a really hard conversation to have and to see any change. So we're really left dealing with this as individual higher education institutions. So yeah, it's an intractable problem, probably the biggest one that I think we face in just relevancy in the future of higher ed in general.
Well, Jeremy, I can't think of a better place to end it than right here. This was a great episode. I really appreciate the insight. If I don't stop, we'll go on for another hour, and I actually have another recording to do today.
Completely
So
understand.
I appreciate you, my friend. Look forward to having you on future episodes. Is there anywhere people can reach you? LinkedIn, Instagram,
Yep. So
TikTok? Go ahead.
yep, I'm on LinkedIn. Folks could find me there. Just there aren't a whole lot of Jeremy Beans in the world, so you'll find me pretty quick if you type me in there. I'm on Penn State's web page. You can find my email address. It's just jeremy.bean@psu.edu. I love doing this and talking about it. I do believe
Sure.
in the greater good of higher education. I do believe we have challenges, but I also think we have so many incredible people that we can solve those challenges moving forward. So yeah, happy to talk more or talk to anyone. I think, there's something to said to be having numbers and to talk to other folks and go, oh yeah, you're struggling with the same thing I'm struggling with. It's not just me. It's a nice thing to have.
Absolutely. All right. Well, take care, my friend. I'll talk to you soon. Rough year for us on the football field, but we
We'll
still
be back.
are.
Yeah, Penn State will be back. I have no doubt, my friend. All right, talk to you soon.
All right. Take care. Bye
Bye now.
bye.